Well, hello, everybody. It's Robert Helms, host of the Real Estate Guys radio program with another edition of Tax Talk. We love to find out when things are going on. Let's say hi to co-host Russell Gray.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Robert, Tom.
You know, we've got Tom Wheelwright with us today. And what we do on Tax Talk is try to bring ideas to you when there are changes. And when the tax code is proposed to change in any way, this is the man we talk to. He's the author of the new bestseller, The Win-Win Wealth Strategy. Let's welcome Tom Wheelwright. Hey, Tom.
Hey, good to be with you guys. Thank you.
You know, when there's tax changes, I know you pay attention to it. And often, like there is now, there's some proposals that are working their way through. First of all, what stage is this new tax change in? And what are the things that we need to watch out for, Tom?
It's very interesting. This is the remnants of the Build Back Better plan. That's what it is. It's the remnants. Now it's called the Inflation Reduction Act. So, of course, you know that whatever the government calls it, it's the opposite.
Right.
So, for example, there is an new import tax on oil, imported oil. Well, that's certainly going to reduce the price at the pump. So right off the bat, right? Inflation Adjustment Reduction Act. There are really, I think, three big provisions, though, in this law that we need to be very careful with. There are a couple of good ones, like they enhance the solar tax credit. I think that's a good one. They extend the electric car credit. I think that's always good. But there are some really nasty ones. The first one being this corporate minimum tax. Now, people go, well, it's only on companies that make $1 billion. I'm going, okay, so just in perspective, when we passed the 16th Amendment to the Constitution that allowed income tax, period, in this country, it was only a 7% tax on people making today's equivalent of $7.5 million a year. So, well, that's not going to apply to me. That's what everybody thought when they passed the 16th Amendment.
Right.
Okay. So this isn't going to apply to me. Let's also remember that these companies, these are who we buy products from, and these are who our 401ks are invested with. So don't believe for a second that corporations are people who pay taxes. They aren't. The bad thing about this tax is really not even the tax rate. It's a 15% minimum tax. It's that it's a tax on book income, which means that rather than being a tax on taxable income, it's a tax on the income that the accountants decide is the amount of income to report to the shareholders. So in other words, instead of Congress determining whether a company gets tax benefits, the Financial Accounting Standards Board gets to determine whether you are taxed on your income. Isn't that a great idea? That completely takes away the independence. It's really a problem with the independence of the Financial Accounting Standards Board. So it is really a serious issue, I think, for this country, that it's even being considered. The second one applies really heavily to you guys and the real estate industry, and that's this carried interest rule.
Right.
So the carried interest rule really first came about in 2017 under the Trump tax law. Oddly enough, not oddly enough, real estate was exempted in that case. So when now the rule was, okay, if you have a carried interest, meaning that you're doing the work, but you're only getting the back end when it sells, right? You're getting a piece of the profits when the project sells. You're not getting a piece of the profits while it's, in its operational period. That's called a carried interest. And what they did in 2017 was said, well, instead of a 1-year holding period for long-term capital gains, we're going to make it a 3-year holding period. Now what they're doing is they're pushing that 3 years to 5 years for the hedge funds, but for the first time, they're including real estate at the 3 years. So if you're a real estate developer or you're doing any kind of real estate syndication, okay, we'll of course bring this up at your syndication conference. If you're doing real estate syndication, guess what? You're going to have to hold that property for 3 years, which I suspect will put a damper on some of the real estate transactions that are going on very quickly. In fact, I would expect that it is currently putting a damper right this minute just because of the proposal.
Right.
The third thing, which is the worst part of the bill, is the IRS gets $80 billion. Now, by itself, that's fine. Okay. The IRS does need some money. But let's look at how this money is allocated. So they get $28 million for their regular operations. Okay, well, that's fine. That 28 billion. And that's pretty much what they need. That's what they have now, right? That's that 28 billion. Then what they get is they get $3 billion for customer service. Really, out of $80 billion, only $3 billion goes to customer service, which means instead of answering 10% of phone calls, they will now answer 20%. I think that's going to be the result. I mean, it's just not enough money for customer service.
Right.
Second of all, it gives $4 billion for technology. Is that, are you kidding? The IRS's technology dates to the 1980s. That's how old it is. And you're giving them only $4 billion for technology. Are you kidding? There are startups that spend more than that much money on technology, right? Then the rest of it, $45 billion goes to enforcement. Now, Russ, you're going to be really interested in this. Part of that enforcement is to enforce the new digital currency that Biden has signed into law by executive order last spring. So Biden signed an executive order saying we're going to have a digital currency. It wasn't legislated. It was an executive order. And now they're giving the IRS money to set up all of the oversight of the currency. You really want the IRS overseeing this new digital currency? I'm sorry, but why isn't Treasury overseeing it? Right? I mean, IRS is part of Treasury, but IRS is a tax part of Treasury. They're not the oversight. They should not be overseeing this. Second of all, but what they're going to do is end up hiring a bunch of lawyers. And here's what I predict will happen if they get this money. Rather than put the money into technology for enforcement, which is where it should go. See, if it was $4 billion extra for enforcement and $45 billion for technology, I would be all in on this. Okay. But it's a flip. And here's the problem. Right now, there are several aspects of the Internal Revenue Code that are very clearly incentives. For example, a conservation easement. There's a huge incentive right in the tax law to put a conservation easement on property that would otherwise be developed. What the IRS has said is, well, that's too good to be true. Therefore, we're just going to disallow. And if you don't like it, we're going to see in court. Well, that's what we're going to see on all sorts of other initiatives by the IRS. Instead of applying the law, what the IRS is likely to do here is say, well, we're not going to apply the law. We're going to apply what we want the law to be, not what the law actually is, and we'll see you in court. Well, I was just talking to an attorney yesterday about how much it costs to take some of these cases through court, and it's about $2 million.
On the defense side?
The defense side.
On the defense side, right.
On the defense side, it's about $2 million. You're about half of that is for your experts, right? And the other half is for the attorneys. $2 million. Tell me how many people are going to fork up $2 million to go to tax court. Very few people. So what's going to happen is, remember, 78 to 80% of the money that they're going to go after is with people who make $200,000 or less. That's according to the Joint Committee on Taxation. This is not according to me. This is not even according to the Tax Policy Center or any of these think tanks. This is the Joint Committee on Taxation. These are the people who actually run the numbers on these bills. 78 to 80% of $200,000 or less. So how are they going to do that? They're going to say, here's what we're going to do. This is your assessment. If you don't like it, go to court. Really? So you get an assessment for what, $20,000, and it costs $2 million to take it to court. Obviously, you're going to say, here's your $20,000, IRS. And that's what's going to happen. So this is, you talk about, Russ, I've heard you talk about deep state. I've heard you talk about, the overreach of the government. The Wall Street Journal had a great editorial about the IRS going into beast mode. And that's exactly what will happen. I'm very, very scared. I've never been so frightened with a bill as I am with this portion of this bill.
Well, Tom, it's interesting because, Robert and I, for however long we've been doing the show, 25-year, quarter century, we really try to avoid getting political. And, I think maybe this even would have been good at the top of the interview, but the reality is policies matter. Policies affect.
Sure.
And so sometimes we get all caught up in the motives of the people. And I think it doesn't matter. You got people, bureaucrats, lifelong politicians, people that have never run a business, never started a business, never taken a capital risk, never had to make payroll, just all the things. And anybody listening to this who's an investor or an entrepreneur understands that it's just a different way of thinking. It's a different life. And so you did, when we recorded the radio show earlier, you made the comment that, hey, the IRS is your enemy. But the tax law is not. The tax law is actually your friend. It's a guidebook. And the problem is that when people who don't understand what makes people like us tick, they add things into the mix thinking they're solving a problem, but they're actually creating a problem. Components of cost. Tax is a component cost.
Sure.
Compliance is a component of cost. When you start restricting how quickly money can turn, meaning, if a developer has to go from 1 year to 3 years, that's really creates a supply chain problem in the very thing that we don't have enough supply of, which is housing. And so the enforcement actually gets in the way of the incentives. So I think at some point you have to say, okay, well, you know what? We don't want to be political, and we're not trying to be political, but people need to be aware this is policy, which is what politics is a derivative of. And in this case, based on people who live in the real world like you and deal with people on a daily basis, both in business and investing, it's bad policy. It's not well thought out, and it's going to have consequences. So we felt like it was important to bring this to the audience and get the word out and help people understand, we're not picking sides. It's not blue versus red. It's really the little guy versus the big. It's you got the big government, big tech, big media, big, everything. And the little guys, the 200,000 income and below, that are going to end up on the wrong end of this thing. So people need to be aware and start paying attention.
Yeah. And Tom, I think, we're here at the beginning of August. Take us through the timeline on this. Is this a done deal? What happens next? And is there anything people can do?
Yeah, call your representative in Congress, call your senator. Okay. So, and they will listen. Okay. If they, unless they're like extremely, entrenched in, Joe Manchin's not going to listen anymore. Joe Manchin sold his soul in order to get a pipeline. That's what he did. He sold his soul for a pipeline. And I would have told you 2 months ago, Joe Manchin ran for president, I'd have been the first in line to vote for him. I cannot honestly tell you I would do that at this point. I think it's a very sad that he would sell his soul for a pipeline. You need to get involved. It's not that hard. Send your senator an email. They all have places you can get on their website and you can send them emails. That's the best thing you can do. And make sure that you talk to your accountant and find out what's in this that's going to affect you, because there are things in this that are going to affect you. I guarantee it. And the IRS part is probably the biggest one. Remember that the average time that the Biden administration bureaucrats have spent in the real world is 2.5 years. They have literally spent less time having a job in the real world than most 25-year-olds.
Wow.
Just for perspective.
So it'd be like if someone tried to send me into the kitchen to cook a meal, and I could really, have great motivation, really want to do a good job, be sincere, but I have no experience. It's not going to be a very good meal. And this is the concern that we have when people who have very little real world experience are making these radical changes to the policies that affect our business decisions and how we deploy capital. And if capital ends up going to the wrong place in an economy, it doesn't create jobs. It doesn't really create taxes. Because here's the other thing, the thing that the politicians don't understand. They think they have a captive audience. They think if they go after people, that these people are just going to bend over and take it. But that's not what happens. What happens is they move. We're seeing it happen at a state level, people moving from states like New York and Illinois and California and fleeing to places like Texas, Florida, even Arizona, Nevada, that are more friendly. Well, a country can suffer that same fate. And tax code is a way that countries can compete for talent, for labor, for resources. So this is not just a small misstep. It could be a really big misstep at a critical time, at a very critical time. So I really appreciate, Tom, the way you make us aware.
That's the problem, is that we're we're seeing the employment market slow down. We're seeing the economy slow down. Jim Rickards has been predicting, saying we've been in a recession for years now, and we're going to, he and several others think we could go into a depression. And now what you're going to do is you're going to put these big tax, really a tax is an anchor. Think of it as a weight, okay, on investment on the economy, because that is by definition, that's what a tax is. And so this is why Art Laffer, says, right, the more tax reduction you have, the faster your economy grows, and actually more tax collections you have. So this is all a fallacy. This is politics. This is not about collecting more revenue. It really isn't. This is about an IRS that really wants to go after people who do what they're supposed to do.
Punish producers.
This is a continuing, by the way, it's a continuance of what I've seen for the last several years as an attack on small business. It is primarily, right, 78 to 80% on people making $200,000 less. Those aren't wage earners you're talking about. Those are business owners. That's your dry cleaners. That's your contractor. That's your yard guy. These are the people that are kind of the bread and butter of our service industry. And the bread and butter of our economy. They're the ones who produce more jobs than all the big businesses and government combined. Okay. And yet this is an attack on small businesses. I suspect in part because small businesses can't be controlled otherwise. And so this is a way to really go after people that you can't unionize.
Well, this is why I say it's not blue versus red. It's not liberal versus conservative. It's really just the little guy versus big. Everybody getting pushed into big corporations, which can be controlled. Everybody being pushed into big media, which can be controlled. 6 corporations control all of the major outlets. People being pushed into, big healthcare, where that can be, really restricted. There's been an attack on the mortgage industry. I was part of that. There was an attack on healthcare first in 1992. Didn't go through, but they got it through a couple of administrations ago. And so, you see the systematic takedown of of Main Street. And, our thing with our syndication program is to empower entrepreneurs to raise money, pull money out of Wall Street, develop on Main Street, start businesses, build properties, take advantage of the incentives. And for a little while, we've had some really great incentives to empower Main Street, and we started to see some results, but that's being reversed. And again, you may not like the people or the personalities on either side, but at the end of the day, you have to just understand these policies do trickle downhill, and you're going to feel them. So you got to pay attention and think about what's happening. If you want to have a voice, then have it. If you don't, then at least have a plan and be sober about what's coming, because there are some headwinds coming that there's probably going to be opportunity on the other side, and we'll work together to figure that out. But hopefully we don't have to. Hopefully that this thing won't go through, and we'll have a better system, more friendly towards the little guy.
Well, we will keep you guys up to date.
Appreciate that. I have one more action item, folks, and that is, if you haven't already, make sure you get Tom's awesome new book. It's called The Win-Win Wealth Strategy: 7 Investments the Government Will Pay You to Make. It's on many bestseller lists right now and available at all your favorite outlets. Tom, thanks so much for sharing with us.
Thank you.
That's another edition of Tax Talk. We'll keep you up to speed, and thanks for watching The Real Estate Guys.
Before you go, 3 things. Number 1, subscribe. When you subscribe, you build up our subscription base, and that helps us reach more people. But even more important, it helps us attract great guests and subject matter experts to share their ideas and information with you. Number 2, click that notification bell to make sure that when we do post a new video on this hot topic, you're notified right away. And number 3, share. Please share this information with friends. Help them get on board this bus. Help them protect and preserve their wealth to take advantage of what's going on in the world today. All right, thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next video.